Today is July 23rd, 2021, and I'm alive sitting here with no M1X MacBook Pro. Mark Gurman said it was coming this summer. A few people said WWDC and were obviously wrong. And now the timeline for release is allegedly between September and November. Usually there's like a natural progression of leaks as far as like what we know about the product and when we find out about stuff, but it seems as though, you know, it was within our grasp for just a short while, but we've kind of lost grips on these MacBooks. And although we're consistently getting leaks here and there, they're mostly coming from sources that don't have the greatest track record right now, at least outside of Mark Gurman. So what's happening with these MacBook Pros? What do you think we're actually going to end up getting and when?
I think they're coming later this fall, Q3, maybe Q4. And I think they're going to be everything that we've seen as far as new ports, more memory. But the big thing obviously is the new design and the legacy ports returning. So that's what I'm most excited for by far.
They've been gone for 4 years, these, you know, what we call legacy ports now, even though they're on, you know, most standard laptops and desktops. So what do you think is going to be different that would make Apple want to bring it back, other than the fact that they're now running on their own silicon? Are we going to expect, can we expect like HDMI 2.1 or something along those lines? Because otherwise, why bring it back, you know?
I mean, it's sort of the same thing with the keyboard. It's like, it makes an inferior product, right? Like not having, for instance, an SD card slot, that's what matters most to me personally. I don't really care about HDMI, but I know a lot of people do because they want to just want to hook up their Mac to an external display, make it quick and easy. So I understand why people want that, but for me, it's all about SD cards because that's still such a prevalent thing in you know, the creative space. Granted, less so than it was a few years ago, right? Because now my camera uses CF Express type A, so
Yep. Same here.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these different standards for external media, for cameras and things like that. So I think, I mean, my first opinion was that Apple was on the right track by removing SD because the onus was up to the camera manufacturers to make it easy to interface with their cameras, right? And I think a lot of them have done that. Like Sony has made it so they have USB-C on their cameras now. Does Canon, the R5?
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't think it's as big of a deal as it used to be because it's so much easier. Like before, you couldn't hook a camera up to a USB cable and have any sort of decent transfer speeds. But now that's sort of prevalent on most modern cameras.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting them choosing to do it now as opposed to maybe like, was there a MacBook Pro in 2018 or did they skip that and go to 2019?
There was in 2018.
Yeah, there was a MacBook Pro in 2018. So I think 2018, like 2 years after the initial refresh, that probably would have been the perfect time. Because like I said, yeah, there's so many, unlike, you know, a keyboard that just doesn't work well, there's no real workaround for that outside of just not using an external keyboard. But, you know, like you said, there's so many different workarounds for, you know, not having HDMI or not having SD card slot. And, you know, so many cameras, like you said, are moving away from the traditional SD card slot. HDMI, for example, there's so many USB-C to HDMI cables you could just buy. Granted, that's not going to be at the top of like an average consumer's mind, but they're out there. You can go to Best Buy and buy one. So to me, I think for it to make an impact, I think they're definitely going to need to come with UHS 2, like some of these rumors have been saying, for the SD card slot. And I think HDMI definitely needs to be 2.1 because otherwise, in my eyes, there isn't a real big usability benefit for someone like me, at least.
But another thing we have to remember is that we're tech-oriented customers, and I think like oftentimes my like older relatives, like I can't tell you how many times they've asked me about dongles and how to connect to their, you know, external monitor or TV or things like that. The average person that's buying a MacBook Pro they do care about that sort of thing. They want easy connectivity. They don't want to have all the dongles and stuff. They'll buy them, of course, but I think it's more of a pain point for them, because they just want to plug it in and work. They don't really care about all the technical reasons behind the decision making. It's just a frustrating thing for them.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Which begs more reason why they didn't do this sooner. And obviously having their own silicon makes it easier, but it was never impossible to have legacy ports on the previous Intel models.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, they had them before. So it's like, yeah, it was one of those things where we wanted to make everything thinner. Those had to go. There wasn't enough space, or at least that was their excuse.
Yeah, thinness never really was a priority to me as a laptop user. I'm more concerned about weight if I'm going to be, throwing it in my backpack and bringing it around with me everywhere. I mean, I get it, thinness is a part of aesthetics, and that's a huge part of Apple's, marketing tactic, thin, light, all that good stuff. I think for the majority of users, they're gonna be pretty happy to see these ports back. Me personally, as a techie though, and given that this is these are the top dogs, we're not talking about like the base level MacBook, we're talking about the pros, which, they say are for pros, and obviously for Apple products, that can mean different things. I just hope they don't drop the ball on making sure that stuff is up to date as far as the ports they do bring back. Because if you bring back the SD card slot and it's just UHS 1, that's fine, and for regular customers that would be cool. But for the enthusiasts who want to buy a MacBook Pro specifically for that enthusiast experience, I think that would be pretty disappointing.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's a given that it's going to be UHS 2. What I'm most looking forward to, though, honestly, the display. I mean, after using the iPad Pro, the 12.1 inch model with the mini LEDs, I can't wait for that to be. It's always a little bit disappointing going back to my MacBook Pro after using that for a long period of time.
Yeah, I think the Retina display is great, but mini LED is kind of just a whole new ball game, at least to me, especially the way Apple does it. But I'm just so conflicted as to whether we're going to actually see this or not. I've heard so much back and forth, and I'm constantly hearing, oh, Apple's having trouble, getting these displays produced. So what do you think? Do you think it's actually possible that these MacBooks are getting mini LED, and do you think that's the reason we haven't got them yet?
It's hard to tell. I mean, with COVID and all the supply restraints, it's just hard to really, this is, of all years, there's definitely an excuse for delays, given all the supply constraints.
Would you rather get a MacBook Pro now with M1X and all that fun stuff, pretty much everything except for the mini LED display this year, or wait till perhaps maybe, if not the very end of this year, next year, to get everything, the mini LED display, all of it?
Give me the M1X. As good as the M1 is, as someone who is like really pushing these machines, I've come up against bottlenecks, especially when it comes to memory and things like that. Yeah, give me the M1X. The mini LED, that's a nice luxury and I'm looking forward to it, but we need something more right now, especially for creatives, because you run against bottlenecks, especially with memory. It's just something I face all the time editing videos.
I agree with that. I think M1X M1, the platform, is so interesting. It's not 100% perfect yet, but I still would not want to go back to Intel.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I recently got an Intel Mac Mini because I was doing some testing with some GPUs and stuff like that. And of course, boot camp stuff I'm working on. And man, it is so slow. It's just like, I couldn't believe we've been using these. Granted, it's the Mac Mini without a GPU attached to it, so that's horrible, period, right? But still, there's a marked difference between the M1 Mac Mini and the Intel Mac Mini. It's night and day. And that just kind of like punched me in the face by how big of a difference it was. So no, I would never want to go back to Intel, except if it was going to something like a Mac Pro.
Yeah, I would say either the Mac Pro or the the latest 27-inch iMac, that still is, at least in my opinion, even the base model is still a really good machine. Load it up with like 32 gigs of RAM and you're gonna be smooth sailing. But even still, you know, I think we could definitely use with some more performance. 32 gigs or 64 gigs, something other than what we've got now is kind of what we're looking for, me personally. And that brings us to like the 32 gig versus 64 gig debate with the MacBook Pro. There's been a bunch of rumors going back and forth saying, oh, so in the past, some people have said these processors would support or come with up to 64 gigs of RAM. And now we're hearing it might just be 32. Do you think we need 64 gigs of RAM on M1X?
I think it would be nice. I mean, yeah, I would, yeah, I would personally want 64 gigabytes. Granted, 32 is still a huge jump over 16, so I'd be happy with that, but yeah, I would definitely, I mean, you can get the 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro with 64 now, right? So it seems like they definitely would want to go 64, just to at least have parity with that 16-inch.
Well, seemingly the 14 and 16-inch are going to be pretty close to the same as far as performance. You would kind of expect it on both, but 32 is probably going to be the sweet spot for the majority of people who aren't doing crazy stuff.
For sure, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, 32 is enough. I mean, realistically, but I still want 64 just because the amount of apps that I have running at the same time is just crazy.
Something that's going to be going away, though, at least as far as what we're hearing, the touch bar. Now, I mean, I never actually owned a Thunderbolt 3 MacBook Pro for an extended period of time, so I never really got to use the touch bar on a daily basis, but I know initially it was real bad, especially as far as like software reliability wise. I know some people reported just the touch bar is just going out, and I think they've improved a lot of those kinks thus far, but even still, it never really did a whole lot.
I think it was a solution looking for a problem that didn't really exist. Like, the whole thing about touch typing is you're typing, you're not looking down at your screen, at your fingers, right?
Yep.
Like, that slows you down. And then when you have to do that, the touch bar is inferior to keyboard shortcuts, right? Because it's, granted, there's some things the touch bar can do that can't really be done with a shortcut, like having sliders and stuff like that on the touch bar. That's cool. And I do appreciate that, especially like the brightness slider and stuff like that, having that visual connection with the actual brightness level. I do appreciate that a lot. So there are some things that I like about the touch bar, but by and large, it's something that I just avoid using just because keyboard shortcuts are so much faster, and it takes you away from looking at the content on screen when you have to, because the touch bar, there's no haptics, right? So yeah, there's no touch typing with the touch bar, which is kind of ironic given the name.
I never really saw the touch bar as like a functional feature. I really just saw it as more of just a probably very expensive to make aesthetic piece, because outside of, you know, some of the shortcuts you would get with certain Apple apps, like, you know, I know when using Final Cut Pro, you have certain shortcuts laid out. That sort of stuff was pretty cool. Although I never really knew anyone, to my knowledge, that took advantage of that stuff to the point where they felt like they needed to have the touch bar. And so, I mean, I think eliminating it probably does more good than it does harm.
Maybe I'll feel different once it's gone, but, and I do think there are some redeeming qualities, especially like having, like just mentioning that brightness slider. Like, to me, that's a better UX experience, user experience over like pressing a key or pressing and holding a key, like having that slider and actually, whoa, like, okay, I see, here's my brightness, right? It's like right there on your finger. But besides that, there's not, I mean, there really isn't that much, for me, redeeming factors for the touch bar to make it essential. So yeah, I'm actually kind of happy it's going to be going away. I think I prefer having those hard keys, the function keys.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what Apple's stance is on that is going to be when, you know, they reveal these new MacBooks with no touch bar. Are they going to address it? Are they just going to be like, here's the new MacBooks and not really mention the fact that the touch bar is gone? Are they going to try to justify it?
That's going to be interesting. Well, I mean, another thing is I don't think there was really like, yeah, Apple apps had touch bar support, but outside of the initial Final Cut Pro touch bar like integration, they really didn't build on that at all. Like, it was, all right, here it is, and that's it. Like, and developers, while some did support it, you just really didn't see a lot of support thrown behind the touch bar, even from Apple's direction, outside of the initial like push. So yeah, I think part of it's just, and another thing is user sentiment. Like, there is a loud vocal, granted it's from the techie side, right, that hate the touch bar, and I'm guilty of that too. I've made several videos just lambasting the touch bar, but I don't know. I think now, from the perspective of a new user, I can see why it would be so valuable. And that, I think that was the direction that Apple was really trying to go, to make their computers more user-friendly. Having a visual on screen is so much more easier to a person than pressing a...
Yeah.
What's an F5? What is that? Like, yeah. What is F3? This is meaningless to me. So actually having like a visual representation of what's going on the screen, I can see that being like extremely helpful. In that regard, I kind of understand why it's there, even though a person like me wouldn't necessarily take advantage of it. I understand the point, and I think Apple did that primarily to cater to those new users.
It's going to be crazy to see how much more these new M1X MacBooks are going to be like the pre-Thunderbolt 3 MacBooks, more than they are like the MacBooks that came right before them, just because of how much stuff is being switched around, how much stuff is being changed. These are going to be pretty exciting machines. And hopefully, if I were to guess, I would say like, my guess is October. I just have because, you know, Gurman said between September and November. September is mostly going to be about the iPhone, at least, you know, towards the beginning of the month. They could do it later in the month, but I think, you know, October probably makes the most sense.